Chapter 7. Spindle Your Wheels. As the fire receded, Dawn came out of her trance. She blinked in shock, trying to remember what had happened. The dark fairy's cackling voice still echoed in her ears. After the sun sets on her 13th birthday tonight, so it shall be granted. She felt a shiver creep down her spine, but now, as the fading afternoon light slanted through the dingy windows, it just looked like a harmless old spinning wheel. Nothing was out of place. No fairy, no flames, and no caw, caw. Dawn jumped. Okay, the raven was still there. That was real. The bird took off from the rafters, madly flapping its wings. Dawn thrust open the doors and the raven flew out. It vanished into the dark forest, swallowed up by the thick trees. Suddenly, the wind kicked up, whistling into the shed and rocking the doors. Smack! They slammed back toward Dawn. She leapt to the side to avoid getting hit. Okay, that was kind of freaky. Slowly, she retreated, still feeling startled, and thought about everything that had just happened. Dark fairies, blood magic, emerald flames, magical spinning wheels and curses? It had to be her overactive imagination, right? Too much time spent isolated out in the middle of nowhere with zero social life and limited internet connectivity would make any teen go nuts. This was the stuff of fairy tales and legends, or books like the ones Philippa read. It wasn't real life. Still, feeling uncertain, Dawn swept her gaze over the shed. A lone shaft of light shone down on the spinning wheel through the slits in the wooden shutters. You're not magical, Dawn whispered to it. You're just a piece of junk, old junk. She ran her hand over the antique to reassure herself. Feeling the splinters poking out of the weathered old wood, she turned the wheel, which gave very stubbornly, however slowly. But the spindle remained almost as if new, with a dot of her blood still gracing its tip. She glanced down at her hurt finger. Her eyes widened. It was healed, and the skin was unbroken. There was no sign that she'd injured it. Dawn felt a shudder echo through her body. Goosebumps pricked her skin. How had that happened? How was it already healed? But there was nothing supernatural about the spinning wheel. It looked like the rest of the stuff crammed in the shed. Old rubbish that nobody in their right mind would ever want. Especially a dark fairy. Right? Dawn shook her head at how ridiculous that idea sounded. She couldn't tell anyone about what she'd imagined. Suddenly, another voice hit her ears. This one was friendlier. Dearie, are you finished in there? It was Aunt Mary. Sun's setting, Aunt Fleur added in a sing-song voice. We should close up the shop, get home, and fix up some supper. Dawn relaxed slightly. Almost finished, she called back, grabbing for supplies. She set back to work, sifting through the junk. To her delight, she found an ancient bicycle and dusted it off. It was old-fashioned and cherry red. It even had a basket strapped to the back and a silver bell that chimed when she flicked it. She reattached the chain, then tried the pedals. She wheeled the bike outside and gave it a test run. Amazingly, the bike worked perfectly. She did a few laps in the parking lot. Maybe she could convince her aunts to let her keep it. She might not have the subway here, but a bicycle meant one thing: freedom. She wouldn't be stuck at home or dependent on her aunts to give her rides. Plus, she had been dreading riding the bus to school the next morning with the other kids because of the rumors and gossip. This way, she could bike to school instead. Then after school, she could ride to the antique shop to help her aunts out. It would save them the trip. Cheered up, Dawn propped the bike by the front door. Then she decided to take advantage of her phone signal and shoot a quick text to her old friends, telling them about her disaster of a day. They'd never play a cruel trick on her like Leah had. But when she opened her phone, it still showed the pictures of the party. New images had been uploaded since she last checked, bringing a fresh swell of rage to Dawn's heart. She felt attacked by the posts. The problems didn't stop at the end of the school day, thanks to her phone and social media. Now they could haunt her all through the night. Forlorn, she put down her phone, not even bothering to text Ronnie and Daniela. She didn't have the heart to rehash it all. She just wanted to forget everything that had happened, including the weird waking nightmare about the fairy in the shed. She wished it was as easy to turn off her brain as it was to put away her phone. That night, after work, Dawn shoveled some dinner, a strange sort of thick stew with chicken and dumplings that made her miss pizza, into her mouth and choked out a question. So, did you talk to my parents yet? Dawn mumbled. Her aunts exchanged worried looks. Their arms fluttered slightly. Not yet, dearie, Fleur said finally. Her voice sounded heavy. Tomorrow, Mary added with a sigh. No use putting it off anymore. That meant Dawn had one last night before her parents found out. Her appetite evaporated instantly as her stomach churned and sloshed. She set her spoon down and announced that she was tired. Best get your beauty rest, Mary said, clearing her bowl and taking it to the sink. Rest up. Tomorrow is a new day, Fleur added, trying to sound hopeful. But Dawn could tell that they weren't relishing delivering this news to her parents. It weighed on them too, but it was inevitable, just like her having to face her classmates at school the next day. Dawn wished her aunts good night, then trudged up the creaky stairs and headed off to bed. She quickly fell into a restless sleep. She tossed and turned, tussling with the quilt. Common criminal! Leah's cruel taunt echoed in her head. Shadows chased her through the school halls, yelling that at her and snickering at her. No, please, it's all a big mistake, Dawn whimpered, cowering down and trying to hide. I didn't steal anything, I swear. I'm not a criminal. But the shadows chased her anyway. She ran down the hall into a room where she slammed the door, and suddenly she was nowhere else altogether. She was back in the shed. She blinked in confusion. Ravens swarmed all around, cawing and dive-bombing her. One pricked her shoulder, while another scratched her cheeks. No! Get away! The spinning wheel sat in the back. A shaft of light shone down on it, but then, creak, 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 the wheel started to spin on its own accord. How is that possible? Dawn backed away. Her heart was threatening to beat out of her chest. Out of the wheel poured golden yarn, woven seemingly from thin air and spun into thread. The thread piled up on the floor as it spun faster and faster. Clank, clank, and then the thread shot out at Dawn. She tried to run away, but the thread wrapped around her ankles and tripped her. She fell hard onto the dusty floor. Her eyes watered from the pain. She struggled to get free. No, let me go. Please, she gasped. But it was futile. The thread came alive like a snake and climbed up her legs, wrapped around her torso, her arms, and finally reached her neck. It encircled it. And then the end of the thread rose as if it was looking at her. It swayed back and forth in front of her eyes. No, let me go, Dawn cried, but her voice was cut off as the thread twisted tighter around her. Suddenly, the thread slithered into her mouth and down her throat. Dawn tried to breathe, but gagged and gasped for air. She felt the thread relentlessly sliding down her throat, wriggling inside her. A dark shadow rose over her as she writhed around on the floor. The eyes glowed with yellow light, boring into her. Then a hideous cackle echoed out. "After sunset tomorrow," the voice boomed. "That wheel belongs to me."